would an AI sort of deserve some kind of recognition, remuneration for being part of the inventing process? I think it's coming. And I know there are people who have been pushing for that, and those voices are growing louder. I think that's going to continue. Although maybe when it comes to AIs, a lot of that is going to be more trade secrets and we don't realize it, but those AIs in the background are discovering things and you don't even know about it.
Hello, I'm Bruce Berman, the host of Understanding IP Matters, the critically acclaimed podcast series that provides leading innovators and experts a space to share their IP story. Learn firsthand about the strengths and weaknesses of copyrights, patents, trademarks, and trade secrets as they adapt to an AI-driven world. This is our 4th season. I am super excited to launch Season 4 of Understanding IP Matters today with a special guest, James Jorash, one of the most prolific and successful inventors and an expert on the science and art of inventing. James is among the top 70 U.S. inventors, having been granted an amazing 780 U.S. patents. His inventions cover a wide range of products and technologies from telecom to financial services, healthcare, and casino gaming. He was instrumental in establishing Priceline.com, and his patents are owned or licensed by many companies, including Facebook and eBay. His preferred way of giving a new idea tangible meaning is rapid prototyping. Prototyping does not have to be expensive or complicated, he says. For me, it's about seeing the idea take form and getting everyone on the same page. At Walker Digital, James had a reputation for training recent college graduates to become successful inventors. He once formed an improv comedy team so that he could relax while not inventing, but it turned out, he says, to be a perfect mental exercise for facilitating brainstorming sessions. James is founder of Science House, an innovation and collaboration facilitator located in a midtown New York brownstone where he works and lives. James, good morning. Thank you for making time to join us. Are you speaking from Science House today?
I am from the heart of Science House right now, yes.
Okay, so let's get right into it. Your early interests were in mathematics, games, and risk analysis, I believe. How did you become a serial inventor?
When I was a kid, I was into games. My mom taught math. My dad was an engineer and entrepreneur. And I think as a kid playing chess, backgammon, Scrabble, poker, you name it, holidays meant the grandparents showed up and it meant a time of competition and games, and the cards came out, the decks got shuffled, and we started playing. But in that world, we didn't just play, we analyzed.
What did you analyze?
I mean, you break down every element of the game because we wanted to win. And if you want to win, you had to figure out, well, what is it that gives you an edge? What is an edge? And that's where the math comes in. And so you start unpacking these games and figuring out how they work, figuring out good strategies. But you can't really get a good strategy unless you understand the game. And that, I think, ultimately got me thinking much more in line with an inventor, right? To think about what is the challenge? What is the problem I'm trying to solve? And then bring tools to unpack that and to really understand it at a deeper level.
I think you grew up in Palo Alto, did you not?
I was born in Palo Alto back when they had some apricot orchards still. I think those are all gone now. But way back, yes. And Palo Alto was a wonderful place to grow up. And of course, there was some fantastic technology that he was even brewing back then. It was a very special place filled with a lot of very special people too, some super bright people.
At Walker Digital, you gave rise to Priceline.com and other businesses. You hired and trained young people, most without a technical background. How did that happen?
We had started to invent, and at Walker Digital, we would invent things, we would launch businesses and incubate businesses. So it was a beehive of activity, and we wanted to grow the inventing side. So I ran the inventing department per se, and we needed inventors. And one option would be to go out to find experienced people. Another option is, well, let's go to the schools, bring some people in and train them. And so I thought that was the simplest, most direct path.
What were you looking for in people?
Well, that was the fun of it, because there's no manual that says, hire an inventor, here's the job description. And when you go to schools to recruit, you can't go to the campuses and just say, well, we're hiring inventors. Like, well, what is that? Everyone has an image in their mind of what that is, but it was tough. So we had to build all of that. I had to figure out what questions to ask, how to evaluate people in an interview, and then once you bring them on board, how do you train them, and how do you train them in a unusual occupation for someone coming right out of school. And it was brand new, but it was so much fun to do that. And the interview process was amazing. We had to really try to get to understand whether or not the person was creative in the interview. Because you can ask someone and you can say, well, are you creative? Oh, Bruce, are you creative? And you're going to say, of course I'm creative. We really wanted to know if they could do that kind of under pressure. And so I had them more or less inventing, sort of, in the interview. And for some people, they melted down. Some of these kids just couldn't handle it. Others were absolutely thrilled and thought it was the greatest thing ever. Those are the ones that tended to go forward. But the entire process was a fabulously creative process as well. I had so much fun with it.
Do you see more inventing from people who are not necessarily engineers or professional inventors?
Absolutely. Creativity is everywhere. And I think that the idea and the notion that inventing might be restricted to an R&D department, or that's for the kind of wacky inventors, the off to the side of the picture, is just not true. And that, again, goes back to when I was a kid, which is you can unpack and understand anything. When you understand something, you can improve it. There are no exceptions. And my favorite example is with bricklaying, which has been around for 6,000 years. We've been laying bricks for 6,000 years. And you would think that by now we pretty much have that process under control, right? We'd understand it. And in the, I think it was sort of late 1800s to 1950s, a guy came along and said, well, no, we don't understand it. And he got out his stopwatch. He sat down with people who laid bricks. He spent hours and hours and hours observing. And what he discovered was, no, we're not that great at laying bricks. And in fact, you can modify the way you lay them to decrease injuries, to increase the output of bricklaying. And sure enough, it made a significant difference. And even to this day, there are research papers coming out of China about concrete, mixes of concrete. The innovation continues. There's no stopping, but it's everywhere. There's nothing in the world that doesn't get touched by this. So to answer your question, really, anybody who goes out there and understands something deeply and understands the problems that are out there and understands the mind of the consumer that could benefit is going to have an opportunity to invent.
You are, James, as much a student of inventing as an inventor. You even wrote a chapter for my 2001 book, From Ideas to Assets, about market versus technology-driven inventing. How would you describe the difference?
Technology-driven is sort of classical inventing. You've got classical Bay Area technology, for example, that's being developed, or Taiwan, advanced technologies that are constantly evolving, smaller, cheaper, faster. And there's always going to be inventing coming out of that. But there's also a lot of inventing that is coming out of just solving people's problems. And those are not necessarily technological ones. And in some cases, you're creating technological solutions to a very human problem, or a very human challenge. There's really both. And I don't see one as better than the other. It is all fundamentally about solving problems and creating new ways of thinking and working and doing.
I think the notion of fun to invent versus need to invent is very real. And I think for engineers, at least, and other creatives, it's fun to do certain things. But if it's not solving a problem or addressing a need, then it may not be so useful.
It's difficult to say what useful is, because sometimes things that what you think are the least useful end up being useful. Famously, a mathematician in the 1950s who really wanted to do mathematics, but didn't want to do anything that could be used in a military sort of environment. And so he deliberately moved his research into an area where he said, there's just no way this is going to be used for any military application. I'm safe. And it turned out that some of what he was doing was a precursor of encryption, which of course later became used in, transmitting secrets around the world. So even someone who did everything they could to avoid having some useful function for their mathematical work, ended up somehow that solution in some other form became something very, very useful and a cornerstone of modern sort of commerce.
And then, of course, the inverse, where you may have a military application for some idea or invention, and it might have applicability to non-military needs and could be very useful. I think the Israeli military is familiar with that. Inventing is often an iterative process. What is your inventing process like? Do your ideas come from the desire to solve a specific problem, usually, or sometimes?
I would say ultimately it's from solving problems, but that can change and sort of morph as you go. You might be inventing to try to solve a certain problem, but halfway in, you realize you've come up with an interesting solution, but that solution might really be better solving another problem. And so you shift to a different problem. So it definitely changes, but I do really like the process and what is innovation as a way of thinking and as a way of solving problems, and how do we improve that? How do you use AI to improve that? How do we get better at it? What is it that makes innovation work or not work? And I find that fascinating. And being in brainstorming sessions, I spent 15 years in daily brainstorming sessions. And just like when I was a kid, I tried to unpack it, like what's going on here and what works, what doesn't work. And there are all kinds of little things in the innovation process that have surprised me over the years. Some things I still don't quite understand, but it's a beautiful process. And I've brought a lot of people in, and it brings people joy, I think, that lots of other sort of pursuits don't. I find it just as creative, if not more creative, than any other pursuit that you might consider creative, whether it's playing guitar or writing a book or whatever. Inventing is a profoundly creative act.
And of course, that's separate from obtaining a patent, because you can engineer sort of like patents. I think of as sort of like tax returns with the IRS. And you can have your accountant engineer just about anything and get your taxes filed. But an issued patent doesn't necessarily mean the invention is valid or useful.
Right. It might end up sitting on a shelf somewhere and nobody has a use for the technology or solutions that you created.
A patent is 100% of something, but 99% of the time that something is nothing. That's how I see it, or at least sometimes see it.
It can feel like nothing, but I think that you are building something, and it is a stepping stone potentially to a bigger thing that you might not realize until a year later or 5 years later or 10 years later. But there's something, it changes your mind in a way that does, I think, come back and help you in the future. There's a part of inventing that I've experienced a lot, and I call it a sort of platform view to inventing. And I will get a group of people together. We will invent, and we will come up with some ideas. And there is the sense that we're on like a first platform when we understand things better, what the problems are and what our solutions are and what's working and the tactics. But you have to keep just hammering away at it. And eventually you get a bit of a breakthrough and you reach the second platform. And from the second platform, you're like, okay, we're seeing and understanding the problem differently now. We're seeing different tactics that we can use, but it's still not quite getting us to the right solution. And you keep fighting and fighting and fighting. And then you eventually make a small breakthrough and you get to the third platform. From the third platform, from there, suddenly you see things that you could never see from the first platform. And on that third platform, now your eyes are open and like, okay, I think I get it now. And that's where the inventions come from. And from the third platform, it's easy to look down at the first platform and say, we were back there. We didn't know anything back there. But when you're on the first platform, you can't just look up and go, well, let's just jump to the third platform. There is no just jump, build and fight your way up. But even that, I think, is an amazing process to go through.
You talk about the value of rapid prototyping, which I can see, and especially with 3D printers today, that can be remarkably fast and effective. But how do you prototype software or an algorithm, or can you?
We've done a lot of that at Science House now. And as we've worked with AI over the years, we've created a rapid prototyping system that helps us build out applications really fast. And when you have that combined with large language models, it's really amazing what you can do. Now, it's a prototype, it's some software, and we can, in some cases, we can get things up and running in a day or two, but that gives you the ability to visualize what you're talking about, even in a rough way. And the minute you visualize what you're working on, everyone is instantly on the same page, and the level of innovation explodes at that point. Once you can see it operating, people are pointing and looking at this screen and saying, "Oh, well, what about this? And let's try this, and let's use it a couple of times." Explosion.
That's the real aha moment, actually. Not what people think it is. The light bulb goes off. As narrowing patentability, the Alice decision, et cetera, 101, as they say in the legal world, has that limited software patents and the Patent Trial and Appeal Board also hampered invention quality? Have these things really improved quality, or have they become obstacles?
I think the obstacle is an obstacle of understanding even. Now, I'm not a patent attorney. I spend a lot of time with them, though. With 101 issues, I know there are and have been some relatively recent new set of examples, for example, 101. And I've been through them and had many discussions with my attorney. I still don't feel like it provides a lot of guidance, at least not for me. For a patent attorney might say differently, but it providing those examples didn't seem to clarify things much. And it just gave me more questions than it answered. It can get frustrating when they're rejecting you on a 101 ground and you point to the examples. Well, wait a minute, you came up with these examples, and isn't mine the same as that? And why not? But then again, the whole patent, the patent process is itself very challenging. How do you get that right? And I think that the patent system, if you look back in the last couple hundred years, has been amazingly effective as a way to provide value to inventors who are coming up with what are somewhat intangible sort of concepts. I think it has worked quite well, but it does get frustrating for sure. And I wish you could provide greater clarity.
How is generative AI playing a role in inventing today? It's certainly burst on the scene. It's only been about 18 months in the public sphere. Are areas like AI, machine learning, data analytics helping inventors?
There's no question it is helping inventors in many ways. One way is just helping to educate inventors. I mean, if you need to understand a subject, it is unbelievable what you can get in a short period of time from large language models. So as a teacher, AI has been incredible. And that is the ultimate fuel for innovation, right? Learning is what you need. That is the fire that ignites the innovation. So in that respect, it's been phenomenal. But I think it's also helping us to understand who we are. And we have done a fair amount of AI in unusual areas around kind of the brain and behavior and cognition. And it has taught us a lot about what we do. And in fact, we are seeing with our own sort of simulations run within AI, we are seeing things come out that have struck us as, wow, that I know this is just an LLM, but the output that we're seeing is output that we see in the real world. And there's an awful lot that we're going to be learning about ourselves from working with AI and how that interaction between the human and prompting the machine and getting the responses back, it's a collaboration. And I think people really understand that more. It's not, I type a prompt and I get back an answer, and then I'm unhappy because the answer is wrong, or I'm happy because the answer is right. It's really a collaboration, which means you're typing prompts, you're getting responses back, and you're trying to understand how neural nets work so that you can get a better answer out of them. And it becomes this collaboration. And it is I edit and change my prompts, understanding what's best for the LLM. And that brings both sides to a better position. But it's a long-term kind of more of a partnership. It's not you and the AI. It really is, you need to be thinking about what the AI is thinking. Why did it make that mistake?
And different AIs may have different, obviously, responses, even though they may all be generative or LLMs, but they may respond differently. Given that, James, given the fact that it is effectively a collaboration, should the AI own some of that idea if it comes to fruition in some way? Or further still, what about the data scraped to get the AI in a position to make the response to your prompt? Should that not be part of the equation?
Well, the second part of your question about should the data that's being scraped be part of the package and the value, I would say probably. I don't know how to do that though. It's a very complex problem, and this is something that's been happening for forever, right? If you want to become a chess grandmaster, you have to study the games of the prior masters. That's how it works, and you study their games in hours and hours and hours, and you ultimately learn from those games. It helps to sort of reshape the neurons in your own brain, and you play a better game of chess. Do you owe those grandmasters financial remuneration? Maybe that's the right thing to do. Can we do that? Probably, but it's a very squirrely question, and which grandmasters contributed the most and which ones didn't, or which artist contributed the most. I don't know. It's a tough challenge. I feel like we'll probably come to a solution at some point in time. I do think that content matters. But on the other point about would an AI sort of deserve some kind of recognition, remuneration for being part of an inventing process, that's probably easier to do. And that may happen sooner. And that might be a cleaner opportunity. And I think it's coming. And I know there are people who have been pushing for that, and those voices are growing louder. I think that's going to continue. Although maybe when it comes to AIs, a lot of that is going to be more trade secrets and we don't realize it, but those AIs in the background are discovering things and you don't even know about it. AI's involvement in innovation, there is no question that's not going away. That's only expanding, and it is expanding at an exponential rate. There's no stopping it.
LLMs, proprietary ones like ChatGPT, even though OpenAI is the name of the parent, from what I understand, it's the most proprietary and closed, at least in terms of code system. And yet, Facebook's trying to do something different. The Allen Institute is promoting OpenAI. What's your thinking about open source in general versus proprietary systems? Does open source fuel standards and make it easier to create better products and services?
Well, open source is going to lower cost dramatically. And I think that with OpenAI, part of the issue has been, and we run into this at Science House because we work with big clients, companies don't want their own information being put into prompts that may get into, in some way, help train the LLM. So there's IP concerns there, which are very, legitimate for sure. And some companies like OpenAI have said, we promise not to use the results, not to use the prompts and not to train on any proprietary data, yada, yada, yada. I think people just don't quite trust them yet. And for that reason, a lot of people, although OpenAI has some amazing models that we love to use, if we have something that is more confidential and client information, we're going to go to a local model. And so something like, Meta has just come up with some really incredible models that can be run on a desktop machine, and you control it, right? The data's not out of your hands. It's really going to put large language models onto the desktop of every computer on the planet. And that's going to do some really strange things, which means there will be 8-year-old kids who start playing around with these things, and they're going to be shaped and affected by these large language models. They will learn to work with them in a way that we can't imagine. And it's going to get into the hands of researchers, academics across the world, into the hands of entrepreneurs. The cost of intelligence will go down to almost zero. And that means, wow, that is going to fuel this transformation of all of mankind for sure. It's not that there's one AI now. There's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions. There will be billions of AIs all over the world soon.
It's funny. We had someone, one of our keynotes at the IP Awareness Summit in Evanston at Northwestern. He's a medical researcher, Dr. Nelson. He's actually an entrepreneur too, with a couple of hundred patents, but he's been using AI for about 30 years, since the Inman Square days at MIT. But it's not generative AI. He said he's barely aware of what generative AI is. And I think people forget that there are different types of AI. And they're so used to hearing about ChatGPT and how great it is and how much fun it is to use that they lose sight of those other capabilities.
I agree. And I encourage people not to use the term generative AI because it implies that you type something in, I like Midjourney, for example, and you're going to say, I want a picture of 10 people in a meeting that are wearing cowboy hats, and you get your picture. And that's kind of a classic example of generative AI, but that's not the sum total of what AI can do. And when you think of it as generative AI, I think people tend to say, okay, well, that's it. That's what AI is. It generates a story for me. It generates an image for me. But really, there are so many other types of AI, and that if we don't look more broadly, you're going to miss a lot. Understand AI, try out different types of AI, and also even when you're working with OpenAI and you're typing prompts, I would encourage people to push the envelope and explore asking questions that you don't think it can answer. Think about something that wouldn't be generative, because we've done this and we've discovered that these AIs are way more capable than what we think, way more capable. It gets back to that sort of partnership with the AI. It's really trying to think about what it can do. How does it think? How does it work? And when you understand that, giving it like a question that's a little out of reach, like a good teacher always gives you a question a little out of reach. Try that with an AI, or try to brainstorm questions that you've never seen someone ask or that you've never asked, and try it and see what it comes back with. And then think about, well, the answer that it comes back with, what does that tell me about, quote unquote, how it thinks? I know that itself is a difficult question, but pushing in that direction, it could be fruitful, and I think it could be fun. And I think that's also where we learn about ourselves too.
That's very interesting. We're training the AI as much as we're getting information from it. A marketing person says he has an assignment for the weekend. He has to knock out a proposal. So he puts in a lot of the company information into the AI, and he gets a proposal, which is about 80% accurate. And then he tweaks it and he's done. He did it in less than a day, and he's great. He's happy. But what he's done also is all that proprietary perspective, information, data, company information that he's put in the AI is now in possession of the AI. So someone else has access to that. Helping to improve the AI by asking the right questions can come back to haunt you.
I've thought about it a lot. I would say if you're looking at the prompts that you're providing to the AI, those may or may not be used to train the AI. You can turn that on or off, at least theoretically, with OpenAI. So it's not necessarily happening. And there are some things you can do to limit that. But even if the AI trained on that knowledge, AIs really don't consume knowledge in the way we think they do. We think that, and I hear people say it a lot, well, there's the AI is, it reads everything, and it has all these facts. And even when you said, you ask it a question and it comes back, it's 80% right, 20% wrong. One of the exercises I love to do with people is to say, okay, it came back with 20% wrong. Why was it wrong? And very often they will describe that, oh, it got this wrong and this wrong. And when they start to unpack it, it's not that the AI is wrong. What they don't realize is the AI has been trained to answer, even if it doesn't have high confidence. And that's probably the way it should be trained. But people interpret it as, well, it gave me the answer back with full confidence. And I said, well, based on what? It didn't give you an exclam at the end. It came back with an answer for you. And it didn't say, I'm not really too sure about this, but it came back to you with an answer. And you thought, oh, well, it's very confident. It's not necessarily confident. And it may be confused by the same things that humans are confused by. And in fact, if you ask humans, they will come back with errors at a much higher error rate than the AIs, for example. what does that mean? And why do humans make those errors? There's a way that humans make those errors. I think there might be some similarities to the reasons that AIs make those errors too. And you really need to think about, that's why it's thinking about what the AI is thinking. And also, they're not just regurgitating text. They have been trained. Their neurons and the pathways in these neurons have altered. And that's learning that results in a different way of thinking, which means they are going to craft their responses in a different way. But it's not like they're giving you back different text. It's a somewhat altered, smarter answer. And I know it's work to parse through it, but to the people who can.
Well, it's very literal. It's at the end of the day, it's a computer. It's zeros and ones. It can learn to be less literal if we teach it to, but we have to understand its personality. Tell us a little bit about Science House and your current work today.
Science House has been working with large companies for more than a decade now. And we started as a traditional sort of consulting firm. And over time, because my heritage is inventing, we started to look at the problems that big companies are experiencing, and we started crafting solutions for them. And initially, the solutions were, workshops and training systems. But we started to get into software, then we getting into AI, and so we have become more of a consulting / software / AI. But the software and the AI is helping us deliver services in a better way. We've done an awful lot of corporate culture work and letting companies and giving companies a better view of their own corporate culture in a way that gives everyone a language to talk and make change, to say, here's where we are today, here's where we need to be, how do we get there? And making it a very tangible process, not a sort of squishy, it's culture, no, you unpack culture, there's a lot to it, and there's a lot that you can do to make it concrete. So we did a lot of that work. We also did work in meetings because we saw that people were spending time in meetings. Professionals are spending time in meetings upwards of 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100% of their time in meetings. Is that time valuable? Is it the best use of their time? And we, as humans in general, have a hard time evaluating knowledge workers. Agriculture, you knew what people produced. Manufacturing, you could count the tires at the end of the shift. What is it that you're measuring for knowledge workers? And it's a bit vague. I don't blame people for it. It's hard to measure. And one of the measurements that we've put out there that is easy to measure is, are you in meetings? And if you're in meetings 80% of the time, then you must be busy. And if you're answering lots of emails and you're on Slack threads, then you must be busy. And busy translates to you're a good knowledge worker. And that's not the case. And so we try to focus on, well, what is the most important thing for a company? What is valuable work? And that's a very interesting and difficult question. And part of what we're doing is trying to say, let's identify where employees are spending time that's not productive. Like a 25-person meeting, for example. Can you bring some of those people out of that meeting where it's not a good fit and put those people into an environment where they can brainstorm or create something new? You have to understand what the company needs, what their customers want, and then understand who is producing those things and how do you get more people producing the right things from a knowledge work perspective. And that's where we use our AI and our software to help sort of untangle that and put people in better roles where hopefully they're actually more productive and happier. A lot of people out there, day to day, they're running to their meetings and they're writing their reports. And I think their sense of purpose, they stop and they question themselves and they say, is this really the right thing to do? And we're trying to help bring them into a new situation where they can have more hours in a row of focus time, where they can really get to that creative level.
It's also getting the company receptive to repurposing, if you will, these workers. And if they're coming up with new ideas and they're brainstorming, it's not R&D. It's not traditional R&D. So that can be a threat, I think, to companies. Do you find that?
That's exactly what it is. And I think that in the United States, R&D has typically been the place in the company where you'd expect to find the inventors And often they were not part of the main campus. They were often in a little building somewhere else. They didn't interact with people a whole lot. And it worked. And the United States has had tremendous innovation. But I think that innovation is now starting to get spread out. And obviously you see in high tech companies, for example, it's more common to see innovation everywhere. With larger, older companies, you don't see that as much. But I think this is going to be a renaissance where the R&D department is not the place for innovation. It's everywhere. And I hope that the people from R&D will welcome that and help others, because you're correct. If you take somebody out of a meeting and you sit them down and say, well, now you're going to do some brainstorming, people don't really know how to do that. And that schools don't train you for that, right? So who's going to help train you? And we can do some of the training, but I think that companies have their own employees. How do you identify people at a company that can help be the Sherpa for that person who's on their creative journey, because they haven't done it before in some cases? And I think I can see new roles at companies for people who are like, okay, so you've been with, you're 24 years old, you've been with a company for a couple of years, and you weren't doing a ton of creative stuff, and now we're asking you to do creative things, but we're going to help you, and we're going to help you guide you through that process. And I hope people enjoy that as much as I have in my innovation sort of journey. I think people are going to find it exciting, and they're going to find energy in that.
Fascinating. James, 2 ideas, concepts you'd like to leave our listeners with? We're just about out of time. If they were to remember 2 things from our conversation, what should they be?
Creativity and innovation are everywhere. There's nothing that is not a target for innovation, bar none. Everyone can do that as well. So no matter what you see, everything you see can be changed and improved. Take a shot at it. You fail, you fail. Second would be around AI. Don't listen to the media. Do your own work. It's far deeper and more interesting than you think. Putting some time in to understanding AI will pay dividends and will enable you to do things and will fuel you going forward, I think, in ways that you can't imagine. I have to say the third one is like, encourage innovation. You've got a family, you've got kids, encourage them to invent, encourage them to come up with ideas. Don't tell them their ideas are stupid, right? Let's get them excited about coming up with thousands of ideas, right? Innovation is not a game of coming up with an idea. Innovation is coming up with 1,000 ideas and then ranking them and then taking the top 2. It is a volume game. And a lot of people don't like to think of creativity as a volume game. It seems almost disquieting but I think the reality is
it's not sexy, it's not the light bulb moment.
Yeah, that's the thing. People think innovation is a lightning bolt. They're walking down the street and it hits you. And it's just not. It's a process. But it's a beautiful process, though. And when you look at a process, processes are boring. And you've lost. So look at innovation as something that occurs over a long period of time and impacted by a lot of different things. And it is a process and it can be improved. And every step of that can be fun if you're okay with that. But don't go in with a preconceived notion that it's boring. We love boring. Boring things are the things that everybody else ignores. We get to look at them. I mean, people said that about meetings, right? We go into companies, we say we work on meetings. Oh, that's boring. But there's incredible opportunity there. Incredible opportunity. And countless person hours transforming business value. It's unbelievable. I mean, I'm excited about it every single day, but most people consider it boring. So find your boring thing and go after it.
And make it less boring. Thank you, James. This was really wonderful. You're a unique personality. I could see the creativity oozing out of you, really. And it's really admirable.
Thank you.
Understanding IP Matters is brought to you by the nonprofit Center for Intellectual Property Understanding with the generous support of its partners and sponsors. Gain access to all 4 seasons by subscribing for free on your favorite platform or email us at explore.understandingip.org. Content conveyed is for informational purposes only and does not represent the views of CIPU or its affiliates. This episode was produced by Jack Shields for Wild Creek Studios. Thank you for listening.